It is only mid-November and I've already worked far more hours than I did in the whole of 2022, which is partly why I haven't made a video for a while. I have been very, very busy. But being busy with paid research is amazing. But what it does mean is that I've also been left with a number of ideas for new videos that have been sitting half finished on my laptop for a while. In today's case, 6 months. Last spring, you may remember that I documented a few moments from the Ormskirk Medieval Festival. And in May 2023, I joined some other volunteers from one of the family history societies that I'm part of, the Ormskirk and District Family History Society, to talk to visitors and answer all their questions and take any available chance to wander around when it was possible, because the Historia Normannis re-enactment group were there again and they were doing the battles and they'd set up camp with the tents and the food and everything you could possibly imagine. Archery practice, crafts, you name it, it was there. Perhaps this might give you a flavour of what it was like in May 2023. The Ormskirk Medieval Festival is usually held on Coronation Park, which is a really short distance from the parish church of St Peter and St Paul. And if you've seen the video that I made this time last year, you may have seen some footage of the churchyard. But this year, I thought I could do something a bit more interesting. The graveyard is the resting place of a surprising number of quite notable people who maybe should be a little bit more famous than they are. I won't pretend that I know enough to give you a comprehensive list, but I will tell you that they include William Edward Heaton, who was awarded the Victoria Cross during the Second Boer War, the Crimea veteran, apparently one of the charge of the Light Brigade, James Aiken Nunnally, originally from somewhere near Warrington, if memory serves. Maybe he should be really famous. William Gould, a landscape gardener who trained under Capability Brown and ended up working for the lover of Catherine the Great, or one of her lovers, in Russia. I was lucky enough to know a lady who once took the trouble to research and write a short biography of William Gould, which is available online. It was published and is freely available, so I'm going to put a link to that website in the description box, and you can read it if you want. So St Peter and St Paul's Churchyard is arguably worth walking around just for those reasons alone. But the thing about being a family history researcher is that you can find something interesting in even the smallest of details. So here are a few stories that I only discovered because I happened to notice an unusual detail on the stone that made me think it was worth photographing. The research came later. What caught my attention about Isabella Newsham's name was her surname. I had an idea that there were people called Newsham in my family tree. And there are, but it was given as somebody's middle name. It was James Newsham Mould, I think, from Southport way, which is not too far from Ormskirk. In fact, there were no people in my family tree who actually have Newsham as a surname. A bit of a false lead, but it did take me to an interesting story. Born Isabella Rimmer, she married a widower, William Newsham, on the 11th September 1862 at St John's Church in Preston. We are some way from Ormskirk here. Now, Rimmer is a name that you really don't want to have to look for in the Southport area. There are thousands of them. But what her gravestone does not tell you is that in 1871, she and William, a police constable, lived at the police station on Shot Lane in Maghull, which is again not too far from Ormskirk. Their eldest three children had been born in Southport, but 8-month-old baby Isabella was born after they reached Maghull. Sadly, a son Francis died in August 1874. He was only 6, and he was buried at St Andrew's Church there. And little Francis's burial record does say that the family were living in Bickerstaff at the time, not too far away again. By the 1880s, however, the Newshams were living in Habergham Eaves, near Burnley. They've gone to East Lancashire now, where William continued to be a police officer. Things change again in 1891, where they are occupying 2 rooms in the casual ward on Birch Street in Southport. So we are now in the correct area. And they were also with their daughter Isabella and a 5-year-old granddaughter named Isabella. 3 Isabellas in one house. Next door, there was a 4-room property where 4 men had spent the night. Shoemaker Bernard Gray from Manchester, general labourers Michael Heffernan from Ireland, William Hitchin from Colne, so East Lancashire again, and James Harrison from Oldham, which is what is now Greater Manchester. Isabella Newsham died on the 12th of March 1894, and by a really, really strange coincidence, her husband William died exactly 5 years to the day afterwards. Quite a brilliant example of historic facts supporting those extra details that you sometimes find on a gravestone. Richard Howard of Ormskirk and Cecilia Oswald, originally from Kirkcaldy in Scotland, were in their mid-20s when they married in 1858. I would very, very much like to know how they met, but they seem to have stayed in Ormskirk. They must have liked it there, because by 1861 the census shows Richard and Cecilia living on St Helens Road with their son Walter, who's only 2, and a lodger, Michael Berry, who had also travelled a long way. He was a groom from Devizes in Wiltshire. On one side, their neighbours were William Lax and his second wife Mary Sophia, their children and 5 servants. William Lax, then aged 55, is a fairly well-known name in the Ormskirk area, particularly if you know anything about the history of the town. He was a doctor and a surgeon, and he was pretty well connected through marriage too. His first wife, Anne Jane Waring, was the daughter of a local solicitor, so we're very, very Victorian middle class there. The Howard and Lax families remained neighbours until at least 1881. Richard and Cecilia's children, Walter and John, then aged 19, so he's born after the 1861 census obviously, were still at home. Both were employed as joiners, and it was a mention of John on the headstone that really caught my attention, because at some point during the next 2 years he must have travelled overseas. He went to Montreal in Canada, and he never came home. He died there in October of 1883, and he was buried there, aged only 21. But he was still remembered on his parents' headstone, which is not as unusual an occurrence as you might think. To make things worse for Richard and Cecilia, their eldest son, Walter, only survived for a further 3 years and about 6 weeks. He succumbed to what was known as a lingering illness in December of 1886. What exactly that was, we can only guess. Maybe something like TB, maybe flu that he just couldn't get over. And then in time Richard too died. Cecilia outlived him by 11 years, and she lived long enough to be on the 1921 census. She died 4 months after it was taken, so she had a fantastically long life. Family historians often come across challenges, and you certainly can find a few of those in the graveyard, especially in Ormskirk. So in the final story for today, I'd like to introduce you to the Sumner family, because their gravestone is definitely cryptic. There are 5 names on this headstone. Edward Sumner, who dies on the 4th of February 1802, aged 77. So he's born in 1725 or thereabouts. Then there's Edward Fletcher, who dies on the 17th of August 1824. He's 25, so he was born about 1799. Then another Fletcher, Henry, who dies on the 19th of October 1827, aged 16. Born about 1811. Henry Fletcher Sr., who dies on the 22nd of August 1839, just into the Victorian period, aged 70. And then his widow, so there's a definite connection here, Margaret, who died on the 24th of November 1845. She was also aged 70. So we know there's a married couple there, but how are they connected to the others? Well, burial records for Henry Fletcher and his wife Margaret indicate that both of them lived in Birch, which is just on the outskirts of Ormskirk. So logic said, check the marriage registers. And sure enough, on the 10th of May 1797, Henry Fletcher and Margaret Sumner, both of the parish of Ormskirk, Birch was in the parish of Ormskirk, married at St. Peter and Paul's Church. And thereafter, they had 11 children. Did you notice that their eldest son was named Edward? We found an Edward Fletcher on that gravestone. So if their eldest child is this Edward, could Edward Sumner be Margaret's father? That would be logical. The first son is named after his grandfather. Personally, I wasn't sure because this Edward Sumner would have been about 50 in 1775, which is on the older side for being a father. Not impossible. And in fact, the baptism records for St. Peter and St. Paul's Church prove it. Margaret, the daughter of Edward and Ellen Sumner of Bickerstaff, was baptised on the 24th of September 1775. We've just been invaded by a cat. The couple first appear in the baptism registers on the 19th of August 1759, when their eldest son Edward was baptised. At that time they lived in Latham, not too far from Birch. The move to Birch comes somewhere between the birth of the fourth child, John, in 1765, and an older Margaret, who was baptised on the 2nd of September 1768, but died in infancy. She was buried almost exactly 2 years later, on the 31st of August 1770. Probably, maybe just made it to her second birthday. And as for Edward Sumner himself, he too was baptised at St. Peter and St. Paul's Church on the 10th of January 1724/25, because this is the period where technically the year began on March the 25th, and that's why you get the double interpretation of the years, because in the old style, January would have still been in 1724, new style is 1725, and he was the son of James Sumner of Birch. With the help of a single gravestone, that means that we have wandered back in time almost exactly 300 years. And strangely enough, 300 years before Edward Sumner was born, I suppose, we were still in the late medieval period, which is a rather nice way to end this video, isn't it?